In an unprecedented move.
20 police officers, 2 county sheriffs, 1 drug cartel, and a highway that runs through the heart of America like an open artery bleeding narcotics into every small town it touches. That is not speculation. That is not rumor. That is what federal prosecutors stood at a podium and announced to the American people. 20 badges. 20 betrayals. 20 men who swore an oath to protect their communities and instead became the most dangerous thing a drug cartel could ever hope to purchase: legal cover. This is the story of how the FBI uncovered one of the most brazen law enforcement corruption schemes in American history. How officers armed with department-issued weapons escorted cocaine shipments worth millions through rural American counties. How 2 sitting sheriffs gave their blessing to Mexican cartel operations in exchange for cash stuffed into envelopes and disguised as campaign donations. And how a single undercover operation spanning nearly 2 years brought them all down. If you think you know how deep corruption can go, you are wrong. Because what happened in the Mississippi Delta was not just bribery. It was not just negligence. It was the systematic transformation of American law enforcement into a private security force for a Mexican drug cartel. And by the time this story ends, you will understand why federal prosecutors called it a monumental betrayal of public trust. Let us begin. 4:17 in the morning, October 30th. The Mississippi Delta. A fog rolls across the flat agricultural land like a burial shroud, settling over cotton fields and catfish farms, over small towns where everyone knows everyone, where the same families have worn badges for 3 generations. The sky is the color of gunmetal. The only sounds are crickets and the distant rumble of 18-wheelers on Highway 61. But in the darkness, something else is moving. Black SUVs with no lights. Unmarked sedans positioned at intersections. FBI tactical teams in full body armor, their faces obscured behind ballistic shields, their weapons drawn. They have been planning this moment for 20 months. Watching. Recording. Building a case file so thick it could crush a man's career with the weight of paper alone. And now, at 4:17 in the morning, they are about to end it. The first breach happens simultaneously across 4 counties. Washington County, Humphreys County, Bolivar County, Yazoo County. The targets are not cartel hideouts. They are not drug dens. They are the homes of police officers. The personal residences of sheriff's deputies. The ranch-style house of a sitting county sheriff who has served his community for years. Flashbangs detonate. Doors splinter inward. Federal agents pour through entryways with weapons raised, shouting commands that echo through quiet suburban streets. Neighbors emerge onto porches in bathrobes, watching in disbelief as men they have known their entire lives are led out in handcuffs, heads bowed, still wearing pajamas. In Greenville, agents execute a search warrant on Sheriff Marcus Hadley of Washington County, a fictional composite representing the kind of official who was arrested that night. They find $17,000 in cash hidden in a bedroom closet. A second cell phone with encrypted messaging applications. And a ledger of payments received, each entry marked with a date that corresponds to a known cocaine shipment through the Delta. 30 miles south, in Belzoni, another team arrests Sheriff Vernon Cole of Humphreys County. He is 63 years old. He has been in law enforcement for 4 decades. And according to federal prosecutors, he has been on the payroll of a Mexican drug cartel for nearly 2 years. By 5:30 in the morning, 14 current or former law enforcement officers are in federal custody. The charges read like a criminal enterprise indictment: conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, bribery, violation of federal firearms laws, money laundering. The combined prison exposure for those arrested exceeds 400 years. But the arrests are just the beginning. Because what the FBI found when they started examining the evidence would expose a corruption network more sophisticated and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Here is what you need to understand about Highway 61. It is not just a road. It runs from New Orleans to Memphis, cutting through some of the poorest counties in America, through regions where a deputy sheriff might earn $40,000 a year and where a single bribe payment can equal 6 months of salary. For a drug cartel looking to move product from the Gulf Coast to distribution hubs in Tennessee and beyond, Highway 61 is a dream corridor, rural, sparsely policed, and monitored primarily by small-town sheriff's departments with limited resources and even more limited oversight. The cartel saw this vulnerability, and they exploited it with surgical precision. According to federal indictments, the operation began in March of 2023 when an undercover FBI agent, posing as a representative of a Mexican drug cartel, made contact with 2 local police officers through a known drug dealer who served as an informant. The agent presented himself as a businessman with a logistics problem. He had cocaine to move. Lots of it. 25 kilograms at a time. And he needed safe passage through the Delta. What happened next should horrify every American who believes in the rule of law. The two officers did not refuse. They did not report the contact to their supervisors. Instead, they got on a plane to Miami. They met with the undercover agent at a hotel. They discussed routes, prices, and protection arrangements. And when they returned to Mississippi, they brought the proposal to their sheriffs. The sheriffs said yes. Within weeks, the cartel had assembled what federal prosecutors would later describe as a private police force. Deputies from multiple agencies agreed to escort cocaine shipments through their jurisdictions, driving ahead of drug convoys in marked patrol cars, using their lights and sirens to clear traffic, their badges and uniforms to discourage any curious state troopers from investigating. They provided armed protection during transactions. They surveilled routes for potential threats. They warned the cartel about law enforcement activities that might disrupt operations. And every single one of them got paid. The FBI documented nearly $200,000 in bribe payments over 19 months. Individual officers received between $10,000 and $37,000. The two sheriffs took their cuts at the top, receiving payments they allegedly attempted to disguise as campaign contributions they never reported as required by law. Let me say that again so it sinks in. Elected sheriffs accepted cash payments from what they believed was a Mexican drug cartel, then tried to hide the money by calling it campaign donations. They turned the democratic process into a money laundering mechanism. This is not corruption. This is command-level collusion. Now let us move to what the FBI found when they started cracking open the digital evidence. And trust me when I tell you, the next part is worse. 2:47 in the afternoon. FBI Cyber Forensics Laboratory, Jackson Field Office. A room full of analysts hunched over workstations, their faces illuminated by the glow of multiple monitors. They have spent the last 72 hours extracting data from seized devices, encrypted cell phones, burner phones, laptops, tablets, and a network-attached storage device recovered from the home of one of the arrested deputies. What they are looking at is not just a payment ledger. It is an operational blueprint. The cartel had given the corruption network a code name, Operation Delta Shield. And the sophistication of their planning would rival any legitimate logistics company. There are routes mapped in detail, with alternating highway segments to avoid creating patterns that might attract attention. There are schedules showing which officers would be on duty during which shipments, ensuring that friendly badges were always available when convoys passed through. There are communication protocols specifying which encrypted applications to use, which code words indicated go or abort, which phone numbers connected to cartel coordinators in Memphis and New Orleans. And there are expansion plans. The cartel was not satisfied with moving 25 kilograms at a time. They were scaling up. Documents recovered from seized devices show proposals to increase shipment sizes to 50 kilograms, to recruit additional officers from neighboring counties, to establish warehouse locations along the route where product could be stored, divided, and repackaged for distribution. One file, dated just 3 months before the arrests, outlines a plan to bring in methamphetamine and fentanyl alongside cocaine. The projected street value of combined monthly shipments, $14 million. And all of it protected by American law enforcement officers wearing American badges, driving American patrol cars, carrying American-issued firearms. The analysts trace financial flows through the recovered data. They find payments routed through cash apps, cryptocurrency wallets, and prepaid debit cards purchased at gas stations across 3 states. They find evidence that some officers opened shell accounts to receive funds, accounts that were never connected to their official financial disclosures. They find text messages where deputies joke about their side income, where they refer to themselves as the highway patrol with laughing emojis. These men thought they were untouchable. They thought they had built a system so secure, so protected by their own positions of authority, that no one would ever catch them. They were wrong. Because the FBI had been watching the entire time. Every drug run those officers escorted, every payment they received, every message they sent had been documented, recorded, and cataloged. The undercover agent who posed as a cartel representative had worn a wire to every meeting. The cocaine those deputies thought they were protecting was controlled by federal law enforcement. It was a trap. And 20 men walked right into it. Now let us talk about what this case reveals about the broader vulnerability of American law enforcement to cartel infiltration. Because what happened in the Mississippi Delta is not an isolated incident. It is a symptom of a national crisis. Drug cartels have learned that buying law enforcement is often more effective than fighting law enforcement. A single corrupt officer can provide intelligence worth more than any armed sicario. A compromised sheriff can guarantee safe passage through an entire county. And a network of dirty cops can transform a vulnerable region into a secure corridor for moving tons of narcotics without ever triggering a federal investigation. The Mississippi Delta case involved approximately $200,000 in bribes. The cocaine those officers believed they were protecting had a wholesale value in the tens of millions. The return on investment for the cartel, even if this had been a real operation rather than an FBI sting, would have been astronomical. Now multiply that math across every rural county in America. Every underfunded sheriff's department. Every poorly paid deputy working a second job to make ends meet. Every stretch of highway that crosses through jurisdictions where oversight is minimal and temptation is everywhere. This is the battlefield. And right now, the cartels are winning. Federal officials who spoke about the Mississippi case used language rarely heard in law enforcement press conferences. They called it a monumental betrayal of public trust. They said it struck at the heart of the community. They acknowledged that these arrests represented just the beginning of a much larger effort to identify and eliminate cartel infiltration of American police forces. But here is the question no one wants to answer. How many other Delta Shields are operating right now, in counties where there is no FBI sting, where there is no undercover agent documenting every transaction, where corrupt officers are escorting real cocaine shipments and the cartel is actually getting its money's worth? The honest answer is that no one knows. And that uncertainty should keep every American awake at night. Let us zoom out further now, because the implications of this case extend far beyond Mississippi. Highway 61 connects to Interstate 55, which runs north to Chicago and south to New Orleans. It intersects with Interstate 20, which stretches from Texas to South Carolina. It links to distribution networks that can reach every major metropolitan area in the eastern United States within 48 hours. When the cartel recruited those Mississippi officers, they were not just buying protection for a few rural counties. They were purchasing access to the American heartland's entire transportation infrastructure. Consider the logistics for a moment. A cocaine shipment originating in Mexico crosses the border in Texas or Arizona. It moves through established cartel corridors to a staging point in Louisiana or the Gulf Coast. From there, it enters the Mississippi Delta, where friendly officers ensure safe passage north along Highway 61. It reaches Memphis, a major distribution hub, where the product is divided and sent east, west, and north to consumer markets in Atlanta, St. Louis, Chicago, and beyond. Every link in that chain depends on avoiding law enforcement detection. And when law enforcement itself becomes part of the chain, the cartel achieves something close to operational invincibility. This is why federal prosecutors are treating the Mississippi case not as an isolated corruption scandal, but as a national security threat. This is why the FBI committed resources to a 19-month undercover operation in counties that most Americans cannot find on a map. This is why the arrests targeted not just low-level deputies but sitting sheriffs, the elected officials who control the badge and the gun in their jurisdictions. The message is clear. The Department of Justice understands that cartel infiltration of American law enforcement is an existential threat to the rule of law itself. But messaging alone will not solve this problem. Resources will. Oversight will. Accountability will. And that brings us to the final chapter of this story. What happens next? The 20 defendants arrested in October face federal charges that could result in decades of imprisonment. The evidence against them, accumulated over 19 months of undercover operations, is described by legal experts as overwhelming. Recordings of conversations. Video of meetings. Documented payments traced to specific individuals. The kind of case that typically ends in plea agreements rather than trials. But the individuals matter less than the system that enabled them. In the weeks following the arrests, federal officials announced expanded investigations into law enforcement corruption across the Mississippi Delta region. They declined to specify how many additional officers might be under scrutiny, but they made clear that the October arrests were not the end of the inquiry. They were the beginning. The state of Mississippi, already reeling from multiple law enforcement scandals in recent years, announced new oversight measures for sheriff's departments. The governor issued a statement declaring that the law must apply equally to everyone regardless of title or position. The state attorney general pledged cooperation with federal investigators. These are appropriate responses. But they are reactive. They address corruption after it has already occurred. What remains unclear is whether anyone in a position of authority is willing to address the systemic vulnerabilities that made this corruption possible in the first place. Why are rural sheriff's departments so poorly funded that deputies are vulnerable to cartel bribes? Why is there so little oversight of law enforcement activities in regions far from major metropolitan areas? Why did it take a federal undercover operation to catch corruption that apparently operated openly for nearly 2 years? These questions have no easy answers. But if we fail to ask them, if we simply process the arrests and move on to the next scandal, we guarantee that Operation Delta Shield will not be the last time American law enforcement becomes a cartel asset. So here is where we end. With 20 men facing federal charges. With 2 sheriffs who allegedly sold their badges to what they believed was a Mexican drug cartel. With a highway that runs through the heart of America, a road that was supposed to connect communities but instead became a corridor for poison. The cocaine those officers thought they were protecting never reached the streets. That is the good news. The FBI's undercover operation prevented real drugs from flowing through real communities, from destroying real lives. But somewhere tonight, on another highway in another state, another convoy is moving. Another officer is making a choice. Another cartel is calculating whether the price of corruption is worth paying. This story is a warning. It is a reminder that power does not always require open violence. Sometimes it only needs silence and ambition. Sometimes it only needs a badge and a willingness to look away. The Mississippi Delta case proves that federal law enforcement has the capability to identify and dismantle cartel infiltration networks. But it also proves that those networks exist. That they are sophisticated. That they target exactly the kinds of communities most Americans never think about: rural, impoverished, overlooked. If you watched this story to the end, you understand something most people do not. You understand that the war against drug cartels is not fought only at the border. It is fought in county courthouses and sheriff's departments and small-town police stations across America. It is fought every time a law enforcement officer faces a choice between integrity and easy money. 20 officers made the wrong choice. They paid for it with their careers, their freedom, and their reputations. But the cartels will keep recruiting. They will keep testing. They will keep looking for the next Delta Shield, the next vulnerable corridor, the next badge willing to betray everything it represents. And that is why this story matters. That is why you need to share it, discuss it, think about it. Because the only thing more dangerous than cartel corruption is cartel corruption that happens in silence, in places no one is watching, along highways no one is protecting. If this story opened your eyes, tap the like button so more people see it. If you want more investigations like this exposed, comment below and let us know. And remember, what you just heard is a dramatization inspired by real events, created to illuminate the dangers of cartel infiltration and law enforcement corruption. The specific names and scenarios are fictional, but the threat they represent is very, very real. Stay vigilant. Stay informed. And never forget that every badge represents a choice between protecting the community and betraying it. The question is not whether the cartels will try again. They will. The question is whether we will be ready when they do.